Over the past few years, the Pokemon Company have done an incredible job of providing players with solid pre-constructed decks that can be turned into competitive champions. We've known about the League Battle decks for a while, but in the last year, other territories around the world have started getting their own versions of competitive pre-constructed decks. And actually, at this point in time, we have a time where there's a Charizard version in all of the different territories. So today, I wanted to look at these competitive pre-constructed decks and put them head to head and see which one comes out on top. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about these pre-constructed decks from around the world. Here are today's competitors. Now, we're going to be going into detail on Charizard EX, but I will do a quick overview on the Miraidon deck as well as the Gardevoir EX deck, where there are multiple versions of that as well. But only one of them exists in all three territories, and that's Charizard EX. For the League Battle deck, we know these come out in English. I actually don't know if these come out in other languages. Let me know in the comments if you have seen League Battle decks in other languages. But in the last year, there have been other competitive level pre-constructed decks, including the Tactics decks, which come out in Asia in the traditional Chinese language, as well as Indonesian and Thai. And then over in Japan, they now have the Battle Master deck line, where Japan has had pre-constructed decks. They have tons of pre-constructed decks, but nothing as competitive as a League Battle deck until recently with this Battle Master line. Here's a quick overview of the League Battle decks that are currently in our standard format. Charizard is the new one that's coming out in November, and then the Gardevoir, Miraidon, and Palkia ones are already in stores. As for Tactics decks, these ones have the three of the same as the League Battle deck. You're getting a Charizard, Miraidon, and Gardevoir, but they also have Meowscarada, Garchomp, and Scizor. And then we also have the Battle Master deck lineup, which is a little shorter. We do have the Charizard, but we also have Chien-Pao, and Chien-Pao has been a very strong deck for quite some time. So really nice to see it get their equivalent of a League Battle deck. And I really wish we had gotten a Chien-Pao League Battle deck like a year ago. Now let's look very quickly at the League Battle deck list. We're going to look at all three lists on the big screen. I'll cover some highlights, and then we'll go and nitpick the lists across one another. The League Battle deck list is very solid. I really like the inclusion of the Pidgeot line as well as the Prime Catcher, which is a massive win for this list. Here's the Tactics deck list, which it's okay. Pidgeot definitely missing here, but we do get the Radiant Charizard and Entei V. And then the Battle Master list from Japan has the curious inclusion of Arceus V and V-Star. This is something that very early on players were using before we discovered the advent of Arven, which makes me think this was developed around that point in time before players really optimized Charizard. But Arceus V-Star, very strong Pokemon in itself, and it does have some benefits. Now let's go head to head to head. And we're going to start with the Charmeleon here, because otherwise the Charizard line is pretty much the same. The only major differentiator here is the Charmeleons, and the League Battle deck and the Tactics deck have a bit of an edge here in the sense that they're playing the 90 HP Charmeleon with the Flare Veil ability that prevents all effects of attacks used by your opponent's Pokemon done to this Pokemon. So certain attacks like Sableye, Lost Mine, or the damage counters from Phantom Mime or Phantom Dive will not hit this Charmeleon, but they will hit this other Charmeleon with 100 HP. Now, the trade-off is that this Charmeleon has the attack Fire Blast for 3 fire energy, does 90 damage, and you discard an energy from this Pokemon. I like this Charmeleon. Like, most competitive decks are not playing this Charmeleon anymore, but I do like it in the sense that if you're up against a deck with Mimikyu, the Fire Blast for 90 is enough to one-hit KO that Mimikyu, and because you have 100 HP and Mimikyu can only do 70, you can technically tank a Mimikyu hit and take out 2 Mimikyus with this Charmeleon. So I'm not going to say this is a bad inclusion, it's just not as good as the Flare Veil Charmeleons that are in the other ones. In terms of draw engines, I wish both of these decks had a Bibarel line and a Pidgeot line. The Tactics deck and the Battle Master deck go all in on the Bibarel, but I'm going to give the League Battle deck the edge here because of the Pidgeot line. Pidgeot is absolutely amazing, letting you pick any card from your deck, and Pidgeot's still kind of expensive and harder to find. I actually find that in my travels, Pidgeot is harder to find and more expensive than even Charizard, so being able to get that is awesome. Bibarel, I mean, I'm not going to say I use the red lines here, and I probably shouldn't have. This should have been orange. Like, Bibarel's a great draw engine, and ideally you have a mix of Pidgeot and Bibarel in your deck. I know that's kind of starting to fall out of favor as people start to experiment with the Dusk Noir line in their Charizard decks, but having both would have been fantastic. But if you have to have one of the two, I would definitely go with Pidgeot over Bibarel. Just drawing up to 5 is great, but it doesn't give you that consistency of Pidgeot being able to draw one of any card. So unfortunately here, the Tactics decks and the Battle Master decks take an L. Now we have to talk a little bit about the filler Pokemon, and I will say the Tactics deck has a bit of an edge here in the sense that it has fewer filler Pokemon with only the one Moltres. Over at the Battle Master deck, they have one Moltres and one Entei, and the Entei is not great. And then the League Battle deck technically has the most fluff with 3 of these Moltreses, which are not very good. The League Battle deck does not have any V Pokemon. At the time that this deck is going to be released, V Pokemon will be, a lot of them will be rotating in a couple of months, so none of those in there. So the Tactics decks and the Battle Master decks were released a little earlier, which makes it a little easier to put them in these decks. The Tactics deck has Entei V, which isn't really played in Charizard, but sometimes it is. It does have the Fleetfoot ability, lets you draw a card when it's in the active, and I do like it for a couple of reasons. One, it's a very easy attacker to set up, especially turn 1 going first, where you can start with the Entei and start swinging right away with the Entei V. If you get a Magma Basin in this deck, you could attack turn 1 going second while also getting your bench set up, so that's really nice. I also like Entei V as a Forest Seal Stone target. Now, none of these decks have Forest Seal Stone, but it's very easy to plug Forest Seal Stone in here because you do have a Pokemon V. Arceus V-Star is an odd inclusion these days, as Arceus V-Star was a Pokemon that we saw a lot in the very early days of Charizard EX, so it does make this list feel a little outdated, but there are benefits to Arceus V-Star. Being able to use that Starbirth ability can really help your consistency and help you get set up, and then Arceus V-Star is not a bad attacker as well, so I don't mind it here. And at the very least, like, between these decks, the League Battle deck, or the Tactics deck and the Battle Master deck, do have benefits of V Pokemon that the League Battle deck does not. One of the biggest losses for the League Battle deck is that it doesn't have Radiant Charizard, which appears in the Tactics deck and the Battle Master deck. Radiant Charizard's a really great endgame attacker, where for 1 fire energy after your opponent's taken 4 prizes, you can swing for 250 damage. But most recently, like at the World Championships, players started powering up Radiant Charizard at the beginning of the game, using Charizard's ability to accelerate energy onto the Radiant Charizard. Then you throw a double turbo on there to cover the full cost of 5, where if you go turn 1 again, if you go first against Regidrago, on turn 2, Radiant Charizard with 5 energy can just knock out a Regidrago V while only having a single prize Pokemon in the active. So definitely the edge here going to the Tactics decks and the Battle Master decks, but I understand why it's not in the League Battle deck. Again, timing is the challenge here, where Radiant Charizard's going to rotate in a few months, and the Pokemon Company needs this Charizard deck to sell beyond that rotation. So unfortunately, Radiant Charizard not in the League Battle deck, but it is in the other ones. Arven, oddly, varies between the decks. I think the Battle Master deck just doesn't have it because at the time this was developed, Arven wasn't really a thing in Charizard decks, and we were relying on Arceus to get those pieces. But Arven is a very strong card in the Charizard decks, letting you get an item and a tool card. This is most potent if you've got Forest Seal Stone as a tool, and I think that's why there's only 2 copies of Arven in the League Battle deck, because there's no Forest Seal Stone. But the Tactics deck does get the edge here because it's got 4 copies of Arven. Professor's Research in general is sort of a weird inclusion in Charizard, but it does make a bit more sense in the Tactics deck and the Battle Master deck, where you don't have the luxury of a Pidgeot to cherry pick cards, so you'll definitely want more opportunities to just draw a whole bunch of cards with something like a Professor's Research. So it's understandable why the League Battle deck has the fewest amount of copies of Research, and then the other two have more, but these are like a beige flag. Charizard doesn't really need Professor's Research, but Professor's Research is also an amazing card, so I don't necessarily mind its inclusion here in any of them. One of the odd omissions in the Tactics deck is that it doesn't have a stadium. Meanwhile, the League Battle deck and the Battle Master deck have Artisan, which allow you to bench a non-rule box basic Pokemon from your deck and just put it onto your bench. So I think that a lot of people are used to seeing Collapse Stadium, and again, Collapse Stadium is not going to be here because we don't have the Rotom and the Lumineon, and Collapse Stadium is going to rotate soon anyway, so Artisan is a nice inclusion here to help with your setup. And I think especially in the Battle Master deck that doesn't have Buddy Puffin, you're going to be leaning on Artisan even more than the others. Speaking of setup, the League Battle deck is the clear victor in this regard, where they've got 4 copies of Buddy Puffin, where you can search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them onto your bench. That's going to be our main way of getting our Charmanders and our Pidgeys on the board. 4 copies of it is fantastic because weirdly Buddy Puffin is kind of hard to get and also kind of expensive for a card that's really essential to this deck. And a lot of decks, really, the Tactics deck only comes with 2 copies of Buddy Puffin, and I think because of the way timing worked, Battle Master does not have any Buddy Puffins, which is unfortunate. Rare Candy is an essential card in the Charizard deck, and unfortunately the Tactics deck comes up short with I have no idea why they only have 2 copies of Rare Candy in there. The League Battle deck wins in this regard, letting you evolve from your basic to stage 2 in one turn without having to use the middle step, and we have 4 copies, which I think is absolutely essential. I think the Battle Master deck, you could argue that you only need 3 Rare Candy because you have Arceus that can cherry pick cards here and there, but I would have liked to have seen 4 in all of these. One little win for the Tactics deck is that it has 2 copies of Pokegear 3.0. Now, I wouldn't put this in the League Battle deck because you have Pidgeot to cherry pick cards, but in the Beebrel line where your draws are a little more random, Pokegear 3.0 gives you a little more opportunity to draw into something like an Iono, Arvin Boss, or Professor's Research. So if we're playing a Beebrel line, I do like the Pokegear in here. The single biggest card out of all of these League Battle decks, though, is Prime Catcher, which is the best A-Spec card in the game right now and probably will be for its lifetime, where you get to switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon into the active and then switch one of your bench Pokemon into the active. Having an item-based gusting card is absolutely insane, and Prime Catcher, at the time of this recording, is about the price of the League Battle deck by itself. So there will be people who are buying the League Battle deck just to get another copy of Prime Catcher or get a copy of Prime Catcher, and because of timing, the Tactics decks and the Battle Master decks do not have A-Specs in them, which gives the League Battle deck a massive advantage. Generally, Charizard decks don't run Switch at all, but there are Switch cards in all of them. 2 copies of Switch in the Tactics deck, 2 in the Battle Master deck, and 1 in the League Battle deck. I do think that relative to how these decks are built, I think having this amount of switches is fine, but if you were to take these out, I would not miss them. The Battle Master deck does lose points in the sense that it doesn't have Technical Machine Evolution, which is a very strong card. Now, not every Charizard deck these days is playing it, but I do suspect that post-rotation, we will see this card teched back into a lot of Charizard decks, where for 1 energy, you can evolve 2 of your bench Pokemon to the next stage, and then you discard this card. So I do like this in helping Charizard set up, and I think, again, timing was such that you couldn't put it in the Battle Master deck, which is really unfortunate because Technical Machine Evolution is a really nice card in this deck. Defiance Band is in the Tactics deck and the League Battle deck, curiously omitted from the Battle Master deck. I'm pretty sure, yeah, this is a card that could have been in the Battle Master deck, but simply isn't. But Defiance Band is really good for giving giving you 30 more damage when you are behind on prizes. And because Charizard's damage scales based on the amount of prizes your opponent's taken, this can let you move up to that next damage cap earlier than your opponent may be expecting, which can give you a massive edge in battle. Lastly, let's talk about energy. All of these have bad energy counts. They all have about twice as much energy as really needed. Yeah, you could argue like Charizard can go as low as 6 energy. We've seen counts as low as 5 fire energy and 1 double turbo energy to help power up that Radiant Charizard early on. I feel most comfortable with 6 to 7, but all of these are 10 plus. And I will say that the League Battle deck technically has the edge because it has the least amount of energy, but I do like that the Battle Master deck does have a double turbo energy to make it easier to power up Arceus. Here's my final ranking of the 3 decks. I think that in first place is the League Battle deck, followed by the Tactics deck, and lastly, the Battle Master deck. Now, keep in mind, I think all of these are strong pre-constructed deck options, and also keep in mind that language is going to be a big factor here. Like if you need a deck in Japanese, then the League Battle deck and the Tactics deck are not going to be for you anyway. But just in terms of the way they are built, I think that the League Battle deck is the best one because it has that Prime Catcher and the Pidgeot line and a full suite of Buddy Poffins. It is unfortunate that you're not getting the Beedrill line or the Radiant Charizard, but those are a lot easier to fix than getting the Pidgeot and the Prime Catcher and the Buddy Poffins. In second place, it's the Tactics deck. I do like the fact that it has Radiant Charizard in there. And Entei V is kind of nice. It can be a good early game attacker, especially if you put Magma Basin in the deck. And then also it is a Forest Seal Stone target, at least for the time being. Pre-rotation, the Entei V is going to be a nice target for that Forest Seal Stone. But you're not getting the Pidgeot line, a weirdly short amount of rare candies, only 2 Buddy Poffins, and then no Stadium cards, which is rather odd. And then in last place, again, still a strong deck in the grand scheme of things, and if you need a competitive pre-constructed deck in Japanese, you don't really have any other options here. I do like the fact that Radiant Charizard is in here, and then Arceus V and V-Star is... you could do worse than Arceus V and V-Star. At the very least, you've got a secondary attacker as well as a Pokemon that's going to help you set up with that V-Star power. But not having the Pidgeot line does suck, and not having any Buddy Poffins or Arvins does hurt this deck as well. While the League Battle deck won the Charizard battle, it's not as easy in the other decks. We don't have a Battle Master version of Miraidon, but we do have a Tactics version of Miraidon. And I'm not going to go through all of the cards like we did with Charizard, but I do want to flag here some of the big differences. And I think the big reason why the Tactics deck, I think, gets the edge over the League Battle deck is the attackers that come with it. Unfortunately, the League Battle deck feels incredibly wonky because you're relying on the Regieleki VMAX line, which is, I mean, these are all like support Pokemon. Like, you're not really wanting to attack with Regieleki, and a lot of the time you're not necessarily wanting to attack with Miraidon either, but you get some really great attackers in the Tactics deck with Raichu V, Raikou V, as well as Iron Hands EX, which is a huge win because Iron Hands is an expensive card for the most part, and just the inclusion of Iron Hands pushes the Tactics deck over the top. And then you're also getting Raikou and Raichu, which is nice as well. So the Tactics deck takes the win in terms of Miraidon, and while it's closer in Gardevoir, I think the League Battle deck is very strong. I think I have to give the edge to the Tactics deck for Gardevoir as well. I do like the fact that you are getting a Screamtail and a Mimikyu in the deck versus the League Battle deck where you're getting a Cresselia. Cresselia kind of flip-flops in and out of the meta, while Screamtail is a guaranteed secondary attacker in the deck, and I do like Mimikyu to help stall for time against V and EX heavy decks. Adding a Flutter Mane would make this even better, but for now, those two are great, and it's a step up relative to the League Battle deck. I think you could make some arguments about the value of Lumineon and Mew EX versus Weirdeer, but what also pushes this over the top is the inclusion of Countercatcher, Earthen Vessel, and 4 copies of Buddy Poffin in the Tactics deck. Meanwhile, the League Battle deck doesn't have any of those cards, and in particular, the loss of Buddy Poffin hurts the League Battle deck in this head-to-head battle, so the Tactics deck wins on that front. Regardless of which one you play, I think all of these are I think it's amazing that these are options available to players around the world. I think one of the big things about playing the Pokemon trading card game is that it can be overwhelming to try and build your own deck, especially if you've never done that before. And being able to just go into a store and get a really strong deck out of the box is fantastic. We've had theme decks that are beginner friendly for a long time, but in the last few years, the Pokemon Company have done an incredible job of giving players competitive decks right out of the box, starting with the League Battle deck line. And now that we have the Tactics decks and the Battle Master decks in Japan, more players around the world are having an easier time than ever to get into the competitive side of play, which is awesome. So much love to Pokemon and all of these different categories of decks. They're all good. We were just kind of nitpicking to kind of see which one's the best at this point in time. But again, even then, it's not a fair fight because they're coming out at different times when the meta's different and rotations hitting them at different times. So this was just a fun way of seeing what else was happening around the world. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the different types of decks around the world. But for now, I got to get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at In Third Person. You can find me on Twitch at In Third Person, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday around 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.